Welcome back to Giant Size Violence, an Ultra Mega podcast. I'm your host, Tommy, and joining me again today is our frequent friend of the show and host of the Henshin podcast, Nathan Marchand. Welcome back to the show, Nate.
It's great to be back, Tommy.
Yeah, very happy to have you here. To the listeners at home, this is actually the second part of a kind of a crossover between Giant Sized Violence and the Henshin podcast. We just did a review of the first two episodes, the original Kamen Rider Black from the 1980s, and now I've asked Nathan to join the show for us to cover the recent remake on Amazon, Kamen Rider Black Sun.
Yes, and now you can actually find it.
Yeah, it's been really weird. The first couple days it was out, I was seeing tweets about this, and I was a little slow to hop on, but yeah, I got onto Amazon Prime on my PlayStation and was like searching Kamen Rider Black Sun, even Amazon Riders, because that's what they called their last Amazon exclusive original, and nowhere to be found. Weirdly, I look it up on my phone, and I'm able to cast it to my Chrome, and it works that way. But yeah, no, I was far from alone in having these weird issues finding it.
Yeah, which was something we actually did talk about a bit in the Henshin Men episode, because I kept saying I couldn't find it, because normally I'm used to when something gets announced for a streaming service, they'll have the webpage set up sometime in advance so that you can go and find it and then add it to your watch list or whatever for when it drops. And I wasn't finding it. And then, me and several other people were like, where is it? We can't find it. I had to have somebody send me the link, and then I manually went there on my laptop, added it to my watch list. The text, most of the text on the entry was in Japanese, but it did say it had English subtitles. I'm like, okay, that's good. But so I was able to watch it on day one, but it never showed up in any of my searches, even though when I would go to my Prime profile, it would say, continue watching Kamen Rider Black Sun. Like, yes, I would like to, but why is it not showing up?
Yeah, and I think that's a real shame, because this is one of the first pieces of Kamen Rider media that I think an American viewer could stumble into and actually connect with pretty well or enjoy. Like, this is better than other mature audiences superhero content here that, like, I'm actually connected to the source material. Like, I think someone's gonna buy into this way sooner than they would Jupiter's Legacy. So
something like that. The other thing that's unusual is, if you listen to our Kamen Rider Black coverage on Henshin Men, we thought this was, because this is how Amazon typically does things, we thought it was going to be a weekly thing. Nope. They used the Netflix model for this one. All 10 episodes dropped on the same day.
Yeah, I'd be curious what the release was like for this in Japan. Like, if this was also an Amazon exclusive over there, or if so, maybe...
It was a worldwide release on Amazon.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe like Amazon Japan or other international branches of it do it this way. Who knows?
I don't know, but all 10 episodes are out. The other thing that's different is that when I say 10 episodes, this is styled more like, for lack of a better way to put it, a 1 hour drama. The episodes are more like 40 minutes on average. So if this was airing on television, it would be closer to an hour with commercials. So that's another thing that's different with this too. I don't know of any other writer series that used a format like this. Now, mind you, I haven't seen Amazon's, or Amazon Writers, whatever you want to call it. So maybe that one's that way too. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm used to the, 23, 25 minute episodes with the, and then, 5 to 7 minutes for commercials, depending on how much you want in there.
Yeah. I think Amazon Writers also took this method. I know it's also like just a 10 episode season, and then, it has a second one. That, or like, I didn't really get sold on Amazon Riders. Maybe the first episode is just painfully slow and felt like 45 minutes. But yeah, no, I think this is them just kind of sticking to that format. And it's probably like, in the realm of writing superhero content, probably easier for people to do at this point, just since I can hardly even think of a mature audience's superhero show that isn't at least 40 minutes long.
I stuff like The Boys on Amazon, which this might actually appeal to people who like The Boys.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, my exposure to The Boys is pretty minimal. I have friends who are really into it, but like I said, wild guess, they might like it.
Yeah. No, I can actually speak to that specifically. Like, I've read all of the boys' comics and watched up to part of season 3, and yeah, incredibly grisly, pessimistic, kind of mean-spirited stuff. But yeah, very up the alley of this. For what it's worth, I kind of dipped out of the boys just because don't love being in the place that it puts your mind. And like this season, they introduce a coerced relationship with the evil Superman and one of the characters you follow the most. And I'm like, okay,
Homelander?
Yeah, like there's enough mature superhero content out there, and frankly, too much superhero content for me to follow that I don't need to put myself here.
Right, for sure.
Gosh, now, honestly, when we covered the first 2 episodes of Kamen Rider Black on your show, our original plan was just to do the first 2 episodes here as well. But yeah, so far I'm really glad we tackled that third one, since this, weirdly enough, even with its 40+ minute runtime, does take a little bit longer to get going. But that third episode, like, for anyone that gives this a shot and isn't quite feeling it, I think episode 3 is where you'll really start to feel like, where you'll start to know if this show is for you or not.
Yeah, I would say so, but it is kind of odd. We were talking a little bit about this before we hit record. It's just so funny to think that this 10 episode miniseries, really, because we haven't finished it yet, so we don't know quite how it ends. But it's essentially double format here, so you could argue if this was a regular writer show, it's more like 20 episodes, but it's moving at a very deliberate pace, whereas if you watch the original Black, and I don't know if this is just a convention of the time or whatever, we watched the first 2 episodes and it's the first 2 of 50 and it clips. It goes.
Yeah. I'll want to revisit that point after we do our summary, because I think I have some thoughts on how that's probably going to be treated, but I don't want to spoil our discussion points before we've filled in the listener a bit.
Right.
So getting into that here, just a heads up, obviously spoilers ahead for the first 3 episodes of Kamen Rider Black Sun, so if you want to go in with fresh eyes, skip about the next 30 seconds here. Our show opens with the horrifying image of 2 young boys undergoing surgery while conscious during a solar eclipse over 50 years ago. They're being implanted with the Kingstone and Sunstone, magical gems that will one day give the boys the ability to transform into powerful Kaijin. We then jump to the present, where we see that Kaijin, animal hybrid monsters that normally look like regular humans unless under extreme duress, are an oppressed people group fighting against discrimination. A 14-year-old human girl named Aoi gives a speech at the UN to convince world leaders that humans and kaijins are equals and to plead for their protection. We're then reintroduced to the now-grown version of the boys from our opening. Kitaro is a loner bounty hunter seemingly indifferent to the hate groups, police violence, and school protests kaijin face. His brother, Nubohiko, is being held prisoner of the cultish Kaijin political party, Gorgum, where he's force-fed a mysterious blood-like food called Heat Heaven that seemingly has kept him from aging beyond young adulthood all these years. When Gorgum puts out a bounty on Aoi's head in order to retrieve the Kingstone she wears as a necklace, Kitaro saves her from a spider Kaijin assassin by transforming into his own powerful monstrous form, the titular Black Sun. Episodes 2 and 3 follow Nubohiko as he escapes and confronts Kitaro, requesting his aid in killing the Creation King, an almost lifeless insect-like monster that all kaijin derive from, as well as the heaven substance that both heals and addicts kaijin. Flashbacks also reveal that in 1972, a young Kitaro and Nubohiko were involved with Gorgum in their early days as a kaijin activist group. They assisted the organization in a plot to kidnap the Prime Minister's son in order to secure equal rights for kaijin. During the confrontation, however, the Prime Minister reveals that Kaijin oppression has been part of a plot to eventually secure their votes and use them as military weapons. Gorgum agrees to become a political party and meet the PM's demands in exchange for equal rights for Kaijin, a decision that causes a split among the members of Gorgum. Back in the present, after Kotaro stops another one of Gorgum's attempts to retrieve the King Stone, he reveals to Aoi that Heat Heaven, the substance she's seen save her best friend's life, is actually made of people.
Soylent Green is people!
We know, it's an ethics thing, it's new veganism.
And for those of you who are familiar with Kamen Rider Black, the original, you'll notice a lot of things that seem very familiar and a lot of things that don't.
Yeah, creepy science monster cult with Gorgum, that's familiar. Weird stones and eclipse stuff, yep. Everything else, we'll see.
Yeah, Creation King, some of the characters, a lot of it is there, but...
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is new, and, like, I really have to give it to the show for doing what I think all remakes should do, or what, like, if you're gonna justify a remake, you should do, and doing what you couldn't do last time. And, like, yeah, everything with this weird Kaijin subclass oppression current, like, kind of diving into X-Men territory here. Yeah, that's all new to everything I've seen. I don't believe that was anywhere in Kamen Rider Black, and they were normally just treated as, monsters of the week that don't seem to have any redeeming qualities back then.
Right. And Gorgum is similar, but really different here, too. They're a political party and not strictly just some bizarre cultish secret society that's trying to take over the world, of course. But that took a little getting used to. But the show, as you mentioned in that summary, very quickly establishes its tone. I was not prepared for the conscious child surgery.
Yeah, I don't think Kamen Rider has ever gotten that level of intense, nor like probably any of the mainstream toku shows in Japan. So I couldn't believe they went that far literally immediately.
Yeah, well, that first episode is bookended with two really gruesome sequences. One is the surgery, and then I love how you very politely mention it in the summary. But that poor Spider Man.
Ooh.
All I wrote in my notes when I got to that part was in all caps, fatality.
Yeah, this is not even close to the first time we've seen Kamen Rider face off against a spider kaiju in the first episode, but this is both the best it's ever looked and the most horrifying, or the most brutal, I should say.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if my co-host Travis, who's a massive Kamen Rider fan, I don't know if he started this yet, but I warned him. It's like, just so you know, Black Sun is very rated R.
Put the kids to bed first.
I wasn't prepared. Basically, the Spider-Man gets disemboweled and decapitated. And I don't mean quickly and cleanly, like Kamen Rider gets a sword and just chops off his head. No, that's too good for the Spider-Man in this show. No, Black Sun manually tears his head off.
Oh yeah, he does a full-on like scorpion fatality here. I mean, I'm here for it.
I just wasn't ready for it.
Yeah, not your dad's Kamen Rider for sure.
Yeah, it's not your daddy's Kamen Rider. I mean, the disemboweling was intense enough, but yeah, the head comes off. He even carries it over to the child after he saves her.
Yeah, nice little trophy.
It's like a cat, you know. Here's a dead squirrel. I got him for you.
Now, I mean, other than the shock of the major tonal shift from anything Kamen Rider we've seen before, what would you say your thoughts on the series so far have been?
Once it kind of gets settled into the tone, I will confess to you, this actually sparked the scholar in me, because I feel like if you're an American, and I've seen some interesting chatter on social media from people who finished the whole show in the first weekend. If you're an American, this is really going to hit differently. And
Mm,
I will be honest with you, in these first couple of episodes, there are points it hits a little too close to home.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's weird how much this hits American politics right now, and I'm wondering how intentional that is. But like, yeah, it one of the first scenes we see is an unarmed, non-resisting Kaijin getting shot by the police in front of a crowd, and
Mhm.
no consequences for the police officer. There's racists protesting outside of schools as a girl is walking toward a Kaijin integrated school.
Right. Thankfully the subtitles will subtitle the stuff on the signs, and they're using phraseology that we as Americans are a little used to. Stuff like "stop kaijin hate," which I think is interesting. They never translate the word kaijin, which is something that Travis and I were saying when we were doing our coverage of the original Kamen Riders. Like, just don't translate the word if it's so confusing how to translate it. Just leave it kaijin. So that's what they're doing here. And so Travis and I willed that into existence. We'll claim that. but so it says "stop kaijin hate," and if you remember a few years ago, there was a bit of a cultural movement for "stop Asian hate" because there was a spike in Asian hate crimes. So there's that. I know this is too far ahead, but I know that I won't get into it because I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen screenshots and that are kind of out of context of other things that have happened later on in the show, and they'll hit even closer to home for Americans.
Part of what makes me wonder if this is intentional, and you would know better than I if you can correct me here, but I think this is the first Kamen Rider series to ever include a black character.
As a regular, I think so. Travis might know a little bit better than me on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Which, given the subject matter, especially when we flash back to the early '70s, which I think might be a bit of an homage to the start of the franchise,
Mm-hmm.
it seems appropriate, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I did a quick Google search on this before we started recording, and the only thing that came up when I looked up black characters in Kamen Rider was characters for Kamen Rider Black. I even put in African characters in Kamen Rider just to see if that helps, and still just characters in Kamen Rider Black. So thanks for the racism, Google.
Whoops. But yeah, like I said, Travis might know a little bit better than me on that, but I do think it's appropriate. Now, here's the thing. Like I said, I haven't had the chance to do a full deep dive into this, but I have come across a couple of articles that would suggest that even though this is really hitting home for Americans, what is happening in this show is, well, let's just say the problems that America has been facing the last couple of years are not unique to America, because there are protests that happen often in Japan from what I am reading. Now, one of the articles I looked at was for Crunchyroll that was talking about the first two episodes, because the Mr. Haddock, Miss Haddock, I should say, it's Alicia Haddock, got to screen the first couple episodes before they dropped onto Prime. And then I found another article that was talking about something that, I'm not kidding you, was called Anti-Immigrant Day in Japan, that was put on by an ultra-nationalist group called the Japan First Party. Yeah. So there is a streak of basically anti-foreigner sentiment in Japan, which is not, without getting too far into it, I can tell you is not too surprising. Japan as a culture for centuries really was very homogenous, and they didn't typically bring people in. We as Americans are just kind of used to it because we are a nation of immigrants. We have people immigrating all the time, so we don't think anything of it. But Japan, they're not really like that, and there is still a very strong contingent of people. They're not a majority, but there's a contingent of people who are still very much in favor of that. And there are particular groups that they don't really like. One, they get singled out, and both of the articles that I was referencing is Koreans.
Mm.
There's a bit of animosity between the Japanese and the Koreans, and they also don't much care for the Chinese. But a lot of these countries in Asia, they have histories. A lot of it goes back to World War II and a bit before World War II, but a lot of them historically don't like each other. Now, with South Korea anyway, when it comes to, say, North Korea, who likes doing things like shooting missiles at them, and Japan, they're like, okay, we're with you. We don't like North Korea either, but
yeah. And I was wondering too, like, I've heard in passing a couple times about some student protests that have happened throughout Japanese history that I think also got pretty forceful suppression from the government, which, again, not a problem unique to Japan and all too common everywhere and violently quelled everywhere, including here. So
right. And given the fact that, from what I was reading, the director for this series is a gentleman by the name of Kazuya Shiraishi. I hope I said that correctly. First off, I think he has no past experience with tokusatsu, and he's a Japanese filmmaker who is known for tackling current day issues in his stuff, which is why I would be curious to find. I really want to know more about the production of this show. I would like to know, at what point did Toei decide, hey, let's go in this direction, and I would love to know more about Mr. Shiraishi, because, like I said, he knows not only what is going on in Japan, but there's just way too much that I've seen in this show that he had to have been following what was going on in the United States the last couple of years. He had to have.
Yeah, and I think that was actually a pretty genius choice of Amazon to bring in a respected director that is such an outsider, because it's certainly worked in making this not feel anything like any other Kamen Rider or Toku series we've ever seen. And in a genre where your mainstay franchises have all existed for like a good 50 years now, that's pretty hard to do, and especially hard to do well. And I would say this definitely strays a lot from the tropes of Toku, to the point some might not even feel like it quite fits the mold anymore, but I'm okay with that. I'm really glad that this isn't just Kamen Rider Black, but more violent.
Right, and that's the other thing. Not only is it incredibly different for most of these Toku franchises. Now, it's not to say I would say Kamen Rider more so than the other big two Toku hero franchises, that being Ultraman and Super Sentai. Kamen Rider as a franchise has been a little bit more willing to branch out. This is not the first time they've kind of tried it. We mentioned Amazon Riders before this. There was also Shin Kamen Rider Prologue in the early 90s, which was a movie, but that was more like Kamen Rider by David Cronenberg.
Mm-hmm.
That was the body horror Kamen Rider. But there's never really been anything quite like this. And like I said, not only is it different for this franchise, it's a remake. That's another potential point against it. They are remaking a specific Kamen Rider show, one that is well beloved in the franchise. That's pretty bold.
Thinking out loud here on like other things that might come close to this, the only thing that comes to mind is maybe like some Guyver content, but again, that's really just closer in the like body horror Toku realm. I've not seen the movies myself, but I don't think
I have.
I doubt they get this political.
They don't get this political. I haven't seen the animes or read the manga, but I have seen the live action movies. They're American, first off, and they're not Japanese. The first one, half the time, thinks it's one of the original Ninja Turtles movies. So it tries to get weird and funny at points, and it just feels out of place. The second movie, while it has a massive budget cut, it doesn't look as good in terms of production. Is a lot darker, and from what I understand, much closer in tone to the original source material. But it's more just it's just R-rated superhero fare where the bad guy will do things like break the arms and risks and all of that of the monsters that he fights.
Mm.
It's nothing like this. The stories are not political. They're aliens trying to take over the world, basically. So it's actually more like Kamen Rider Black, the original, in that regard.
But on the political side of things, and this is why I'm really glad we watched the third episode and didn't just stop at 2.
Right.
Like, we see that our hero is very indifferent to everything that's going on. Like, literally, the police shooting we mentioned earlier happens right outside his window as he's eating at a restaurant. Like, he doesn't react to it at all.
Yeah.
And so, like, I was ready to come into this being like, so what's with this main character? Like, doesn't have any emotion, doesn't care anything about anything, and I don't know if I like that. But with the third episode reveals where we see, like, oh yeah, he and Nobuhiko were, like, the most involved in this, and now we've seen that, like, even when doing the most you possibly can to an extreme, things still get twisted and taken out of your control, and, like, end up, you have to sacrifice all your morals, and nothing but changes for the better.
Right. Now, just one more quick thing. I have some thoughts on that, but just to go back to the filmmakers here, it should be mentioned, yes, our director's never done tokusatsu, but our special effects director is Shinji Higuchi, who is a well-regarded powerhouse veteran of tokusatsu. He's been working in the industry since the mid-'80s. He's worked on Godzilla films. He's worked on the Gamera trilogy from the 90s. He worked with Hideaki Anno on some of his anime projects. He co-directed Shin Godzilla with Hideaki Anno. He recently directed Shin Ultraman that had Hideaki Anno as the producer and screenwriter. And believe it or not, also a mocap actor. Yes. Hideaki Anno did mocap for Ultraman in that movie. Let that sink in. But anyway.
You know, I know this is a complete opposite tangent, but, like, I'm actually not surprised at all with, especially what I know specifically from Blue Nova's videos about him getting his start doing little Kamen Rider fan films and being Kamen Rider, or Ultraman.
Yeah, for sure. So I find that interesting that we have the captain of the ship here is a guy who's never really done tokusatsu. He did watch all of Kamen Rider Black. He did his homework. So it's like Nicholas Meyer with Star Trek 2. He did his homework. But we have a veteran of it here with Shinji Higuchi, who has also worked on Rider before. He's done some work on Rider before. But anyway, to bring that up, you were talking about. Remind me what you were talking about.
Let's see. I had just brought up the indifference of the main character with Kitaro and how, like, it goes back and it, like, I thought they were going to be setting up some kind of, like, Charles Xavier and Magneto dynamic between Kitaro and Nobuhiko, but in reality, it's more like, I don't know, an old man Logan and Magneto mentality.
There's a little bit of that there is a little bit of that. If looking at the descriptions of the following episodes, it sounds like it is going. Nobuhiko Shadow Moon is going to start going the Magneto route with this. Near as I can tell, because it sounds like he just starts rallying a bunch of kaijin to his side, which I think is going to force Kotaro to act more than he wants to.
I'm really curious to see how they explore that, because, like, I hate to be that person, like, supporting the radical here, but, like, 3 episodes in, I don't see anything wrong with what Nobuhiko is doing. Like,
well, this is the thought I was going to bring up. What I find interesting here is, we're being presented with an oppressed group and oppressors, but we find out that it's not as clear cut as we might like it to be. Mm-hmm. Because in the second episode, well, first off, we get a little bit of it in that first episode. The cop panics and shoots an unarmed kaijin, and then he freaks out that he shot somebody. He just has this panic, and then the other officers have to take him away. But then in the beginning of the second episode, when we flash back to the 70s, it opens with a trio of kaijin hunting a regular human down in an alleyway and stabbing him to death. But then it cuts to normal humans lynching and burning a kaijin just for being a kaijin. And they were accusing the kaijin of murdering somebody. So I'm like, well, that does complicate things, doesn't it? It's a cycle of hate that never gets broken.
Yeah,
One group gets oppressed by somebody, they react violently, commit horrendous crimes, which then just fuels the hatred, and it just keeps going.
Yeah, I guess in the case of Shadow Moon or Nobuhiko's alter ego here, like in his situation in the present, we've seen the quote-unquote right way of kaijin change happening with the Gorgon political party, and like even the kaijin in power are doing like horrendous things and basically compromising or sacrificing their own people. So it's like, yeah, I'm not really sure what else you do in this situation when your people are getting shot without consequences and going to be used for military weapons. Like, yeah, no, I think armed revolt is the right answer in this case. What I do think complicates it, though, is like we also find out as it goes along is that the kaijin seemingly haven't always existed in this world. Like they all derive from this hidden creation king creature. So they're
who's very different here compared to what he's like in the original Black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to my knowledge he doesn't like have a shown physical form in the original.
Oh, he does.
Oh,
he does. He's a giant disembodied heart.
Oh, that, yeah. So we don't see like a proper body.
No, because I looked it up. It's like, okay, I haven't got far enough to see the Creation King. What was he in the original? Oh, a giant disembodied heart. Okay. which you don't see until toward the end of the show. This one, they don't even bother hiding it. You see him in the first episode.
Yeah, and I was also curious just because I think my favorite minor character they've shown is this big bug boy, or he kind of looks like a spikier version of Black Sun, Bilgenia. And I was like, oh yeah, he's got to be recurring if they're going to name drop him so many times.
Right.
And yeah, I saw he looks very different than his original version in the show.
He does. But to going back to what you were mentioning about the government, that's the other thing is I would not necessarily call this show pro-government because the government officials in this are not presented in a positive light either.
Oh yeah, the prime minister's like a horrible person.
Oh, he's horrible. And when he was talking about he's talking to those kaijin in secret, and it's like, we want to have equal rights. He's like, okay, we'll give you equal rights, and here's why I'm going to give you equal rights. And I'm like, oh my gosh, again. Hitting close to home if you're in America, because it's the sort of talking points that we hear when talking about our own immigration issues, which is, oh, if I give them all equal rights, they'll all vote for me, and I'll have a bunch of really powerful people that I can put in the military because, and then I'll be able to increase my power and reform the Constitution so that we can have a more aggressive military, which actually is a thing that has been going on in Japan for a long time. Their Constitution, which was given to them at the end of the occupation after World War II by the Americans, has what is called Article 9, which essentially made Japan renounce war. Essentially, they could have a military force that was large enough to defend their borders, but that was it. The self-defense forces are pretty tiny and not as well. They're well armed, but they're really tiny. They're only large enough to protect their borders. They can't actually wage aggressive war anymore. And this guy wants to reform that.
And as far as depicting the government bad, like they're showing every possible flaw a politician can with this prime minister. Like it's not just the abuse of power or like subjecting people to oppression for his own gain. Like we even see this like eyes wide shut rich people party where they're bidding on kaijin and like he's just lining his pockets with that money. Yeah.
And the worst part was they had I don't know what else to call her other than, the hot ringside girl who comes in and the kaijin after he transfers just goes full tilt feral and actually attacks her, doesn't kill her, but I think bit her on the face pretty good. They just take her away. They don't even And I'm like, is anyone going to react to the fact that the hot girl just got attacked pretty savagely? Or do we care? No, we don't care. Okay.
The little thing I caught that I loved in that was you see a few of the people flipping through this like little magazine or like binder full of various kaijin that look more like traditional Kamen Rider monsters of the week, even in those poses. And I know those are like fanzines you can get over there. Like I was at a Japanese store in Portland a couple months ago and got this Ultraman magazine that has like every single Ultraman and kaiju up through a very recent season. So I know that this is a common thing, these like little gallery books of all the costumes and characters.
Right. Yeah. It's just, yeah, there's so much going on in this. And also something else to be mindful. If you're going into this thinking that you're going to get constant special effects, or especially if you're going in thinking you're going to get constant action, you're going to be very disappointed. There's maybe one action sequence per episode that we've seen. And they're not necessarily what you would call balls to the wall crazy, other than maybe the Spider-Man fight scene. But that was probably a little bit more just shock value right there. The rest of the fight scenes are much less actiony and intense, I guess.
Yeah, and I actually can really appreciate that in mature content. Like, it's definitely brutal and like jaw-droppingly violent, but you never feel like it's trying to glorify the violence or like make it look especially cool or like all that well choreographed. In fact, a lot of the fights almost seem like kind of poorly choreographed, but in a way that makes them seem more realistic, like how two people would actually fight.
Right. Yes. The other one that was a little difficult to watch was actually in episode 2 with, I can't remember who it, well, I don't remember what her name is, but it was that plant kaijin woman.
Yeah.
Who kills the little bird, who kills the little bird guy by stomping on his head with her high. She actually has high heel shoes.
Yeah, little bird stomp.
Yeah, and the poor guy's eyes actually bug out of his skull.
That's probably the most shocked I've been in this show so far, was that they killed a little bird boy on screen. Thankfully, to the listeners at home that haven't watched, they give him some of the human goo, and it heals him, and that's kind of a plot point later. He's like, what happened to me?
Yeah, which they're building some interesting stuff there, which that is a freaky aspect of this as well, because they bring up this food substance called heaven. I mean, calling it heaven is already an interesting thing. And then we find out that the stuff not only is basically addictive for kaijin, it can turn normal humans into kaijin. Oh boy. And then we find out that it's made primarily using human flesh and some magic stuff.
Yeah,
I get not magic, but some extract from the Creation King. That's why I made the Soylent Green joke earlier. So it's really disturbing, and I think that Kotaro is very much against it. That's why he very reluctantly used it on the kid, and very reluctantly explained to Aoi, yeah, this is what's going on.
Yeah, like the first time Nobuhiko sees Kotaro, and like Kotaro's now at least 60, probably 70, young 70 at that, but
yeah,
like, why aren't you eating heaven? That'll keep you young. That's why he still looks like he's in his 20s, and Kotaro's at least 50.
Right. But you know who we another thing we should talk about, because we haven't talked about her except only in past. We need to talk about Aoi. Aoi is a new character. As far as I know, there's no character like this in the original. And this is another one of those cases where I sit here thinking, is this another rip from the headlines thing? And you're going to have to help me with the name, but there was I'm trying to remember her name. There was that teenage girl a few years ago who got a bunch of attention because she was this very she's from, where is she? I think she's from Sweden or something like that. She's a very outspoken environmental activist.
Yeah, Greta Thunberg.
Thunberg, yeah. I couldn't help but think, it was like, was Aoi inspired a bit by that. This 14-year-old Japanese girl who is advocating for the rights of kaijin. She is known for doing that, and even got to go to the UN. That's her first scene, is she's at the UN, at a UN session, advocating for the rights of kaijin, speaking in English, pretty excellent English, I might add. And then that makes her a target in one form or another in the next couple of episodes that we've seen.
Now, I think you're right in that she's probably based or inspired by a lot of real-world young activists. I don't know how much Greta Thunberg would be there, just because, like,
right,
at least personality and actions-wise, like, Greta Thunberg is way more badass than this. Like, she's way more aggressive in everything she's going for in the best way possible. She pisses off Ben Shapiro in the best way possible. She would not be taking this level of shit.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if it's a direct inspiration, not especially compared to everything else that we've seen in the show, but it was something that came to my mind.
Yeah,
and again,
I think
hitting a little close to home.
I think more direct inspirations might be like Malala or like Ruby Bridges in the United States, who was famously part of the case where people were protesting outside of an integrated school, and she needed the military to escort her into the school, which
right.
Like, we very much get that imagery here as well.
We do. But it's one of those things. There are points where it does hit so close to home that it almost became a little difficult for me at points to separate this from real world events. I know we've been comparing this a lot to X-Men, but one of the beauties of X-Men, one of the genius things, honestly, about X-Men was that it was presented in such a way clearly inspired by current events in the 60s when it was created. Mm-hmm. The civil rights movement. Some have even wondered if Professor X is a reference to Malcolm X. And all of this sort of stuff, I get it. The wall of separation between fiction and reality with Black feels thinner to me, which makes it a little harder to consume compared to most X-Men content that I have partaken of. I don't know what it was like for you.
For me, like it really depends on the era of X-Men and such, because like X-Men does sometimes go there. Like, I mean,
it does.
The last time X-Men hit me that hard was right before the big reboot. There was this scene, I think the character was Wolfsbane, that she's just a mutant in the park, from one of the more obscure books, but some catcallers come by and whistle at her. She's like trying to scare them off when they're intimidating her, and kind of wolfs out, and they say like, "Oh, it's a mutant. I thought you were a real girl." And they then proceed to murder her.
Oh, jeez.
And yeah, so that definitely hit home. But like, I was at the same time glad to see like X-Men going where it needs to in the modern day. And then like also Wolverine and Psylocke track these people down, give them a bunch of weapons. They're like, hey, fight back. We want to savor this. Or like, we're giving you the opportunity you didn't give her. And
right. Did
X-Men
you ever,
tangent aside. Go ahead.
Did you ever read Man Loves, God Kills?
I have not. That's like the one massive Claremont book I have not gotten around to.
Right. That when you were talking about that, it made me think of God Loves, Man Kills, which I have read, and there was also a follow up to it in the early 2000s, also written by Claremont. But in that one, it's about a televangelist who is very anti-mutant, and so anti-mutant that he actually basically had a squad of soldiers that he would send out, and if they encountered any mutants, they would kill them. And the X-Men were investigating that, and it eventually took them to him, and the end of it, like the first scene is some mutant kids at a playground, and then these soldiers just come up, and they don't show it, it's implied, but they get murdered by the soldiers. And then by the end of it, the X-Men confront this guy who's his name is Stryker. If you've seen X-Men 2, General Stryker was inspired by this character. They confront him on his televangelist show about what he's doing and manage to put him away. But still, that's what it was making me think of.
All that aside, or what I was getting to there is that I think some of the cultural barrier here helps in that, like, this...
Right.
a lot of this, like, it looks like events in America, but doesn't look like America, and like is just in a very different context with the kaijin and such. Whereas even other media from Japanese creators, like Detroit Become Human, like that, it's way more thinly veiled. Like they're even using, like, literally replacing the word black with android in a few moments, and like to a T, like down to their social movements and marches and such.
Yeah. I think the most, like we've mentioned before with this, is there was Stop Kaijin Hate, which sounds like Stop Asian Hate.
Like, I definitely feel you though, and that like this often feels hard to watch, but I'm really glad it is. Like, okay, I know the American toku watching audience is not that big. Like, I think the Tokusatsu subreddit has less than 20,000 subscribers in total. But ask any girl Power Ranger fan about Power Rangers fandom, or any girl Toku fan about the Toku fandom at large, and a lot of us aren't that great. Present company excluded, of course, but there's a lot of toxicity here. And the fact that this is coming from a place where I don't feel like the worst, most neckbeardy of us that were mad when they heard Kamen Rider was getting a black son, I don't think that they're gonna see this and feel like it's American politics being shoved down their throat. Like, it's more generalized race and discrimination politics, and it's like, you can't say this is some American lib trying to impart their political views on you.
Right. But that's why I wanted to find out who's working on this, because I do feel like if nothing was different and this was produced by an American studio, you probably would have had that very immediate visceral reaction to it with those sorts of accusations. That's like, okay, wait, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. And so there's probably, I wouldn't be surprised if there are still people out on the internet who are having those sorts of reactions because they don't know the context. That's why I am so big on cultural and historical context, because if you're going to understand a piece of foreign media, you have to understand where it's coming from. You can't just superimpose your own cultural context upon it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it can be a little bit easier to do that here, but when you dig into it, you find out, no, there's stuff like this going on in Japan too. It's something we can all understand.
I've seen Amazon, I think they've been pretty good in the past about having special features on the streaming services. Like Evangelion has a little documentary about the making of the Rebuild films that I think is an Amazon original, or at least they carry it. So I'm really hoping we get something like this here, since, as you mentioned, like, I'm also very curious about how this project came to be, and I want to see the history that they dive into there, like what specifically the director and writers were pulling from here.
Right. So to get a little bit away from the politics and themes here a little bit, to just the filmmaking aspect of this, how did you feel about the flashbacks in this, how they were implemented?
I think if this show has one flaw when it comes to their flashbacks, and I'll preface this saying, like, I actually really enjoy the flashback sequences a lot more. I like that part of the story. I find it's often hard to tell, like, when they've shifted from the past to the present and vice versa. Like, until I see a character I clearly recognize and can tell it's the younger version and not the artificially younger version in Nubihiko's case. Because, like, a lot of their set pieces, both in the past and present, are very, like, dingy, dungeon-like, or prison-like, so it's hard to tell from a first glance when they take place. And there's so many characters in this, and many we've only seen, like, 2 to 4 times, that I'm not immediately seeing a character and being like, oh, that's the modern version of this guy. Like, it's... I think it can be a little hard to follow, but not to an extreme detriment of the show.
Right. I agree with you. There were points where I was a little confused about whether or not we were in the past or the present, because not all the characters age. And I mean, like the black guy who's in this, he's only, so far anyway, been in the 70s scenes. Mm-hmm. He hasn't been in the present. And sometimes, so I have to look for things like that, or the costumes, the fashion. I try to pay attention to that. So, like, okay, is this Are we doing modern or are we doing 70s here?
Is it how I want to dress now or how I mostly see people dress now?
Yeah, so that's been a bit wonky. We've talked a bit about the pacing with it, how not a lot happens until that third episode.
And that's actually something I wanted to touch on more with your point earlier on like how they're like with this deliberate pacing and like how little happens in the first two episodes. At the same time, episode 3 covers in just the, I don't know, 3-4 scenes that happen in the past. The cold open is them kidnapping the prime minister's son in a pretty awesome sequence. And then, like, I think the next time it goes back to the past, it's like, oh, there's already been some kind of, like, siege of the other half of Gorgum to wherever the prime minister is, and, oh, they're already in the middle of their peace talks? Like, this show jumps around quite a bit to, like, just show you how much of the world's story has already happened, and...
Right.
I don't think that's necessarily a flaw, because like I think there's a certain level of realism to that, and that it's not 5 people that completely steer these movements or make all of the change happen. Like, it's a bunch of different forces, a lot of them that aren't that interesting until the point that they're actually doing the thing. Like the people talking to the prime minister, I don't know how much we've seen or heard from them before that scene, because they just hadn't done anything that memorable, if they were there at all. Right. Or like Bill Genia, who all of a sudden like morphs out, gets real angry, and becomes my favorite character in a single scene. I'm like, oh dang, where's this guy been? I want to know more about this dude. Yeah, like I'm not gonna treat it as a flaw, but it's definitely something that's gonna rub some people kind of in a weird way.
Right. I look at it as like, is this just kind of handled a little bit sloppily, or is it putting a lot of faith in the audience to follow?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that could be a difficult tightrope to walk, because I don't think you should treat your audience like they're a bunch of idiots and spoon feed stuff to them. But there is also the issue of being so obtuse that it's not communicating clearly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And yeah. I really think with camera filters and a few other obvious things for the dum-dums in the audience like me, like I think they could make it more clear, even just putting like 1972 and then present.
Which they did do a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mostly like when they first show a flashback scene, they'll put 1972 and then move on.
Like, I think... since you mentioned earlier them doing something for like the anniversary of Kamen Rider, I feel like that's part of the reason every episode features a like Kamen Rider 50th anniversary project. They're very much playing with that exactly 50-year time jump between the two times.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's it
is also the 35th anniversary of Black, the original. 1987.
Yeah, I wonder if they're gonna pull that time frame in much in the upcoming episodes. Like,
I would be curious if they do, because I could see this being kind of an ongoing series of events over the course of time. They've already hinted at that, so that could be interesting.
Yeah, and with what it feels like they're setting up here with like some kind of split among the members of Gorgum, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe we follow up again in the 80s, and maybe that's where Nobuhiko gets captured, because he's clearly been in their custody for a long time, because he's got a huge beard.
Yeah.
So like I think that'd be pretty cool if they follow up in 1987, and that's where like the various factions are kind of at war or what have you.
Right. So I think one last thing I would like to talk about a little bit would be the special effects in this, which are actually kind of interesting, because it feels like it is kind of bucking the trend a bit with a lot of modern toku. A lot of modern toku has been not fully embracing CGI, but using it more. And I don't think we've had a single bit of CGI in this. It has been all... Well, I take it back. We've had a little. Yeah. We have had a little. The Spider-Man had a bit of CGI.
Exactly.
But I think that's about it. Well, and some of the transformations have a little bit of CGI, but they've been working very hard. I feel like even harder than a lot of other modern toku shows to use as much practical as they can.
Yeah, like I definitely think it's one of those things where it's practical effects enhanced with digital effects, which when that's done well, you don't notice the digital side, which is why a lot of times they don't get the credit that's due. I will say, like, one, I am super glad that this is basically all practical, at least from the first impression, just because I kind of hate CGI in toku shows, since rarely do they have the budget for, like, good CGI, no shame.
I not long after we recorded on Henshin Men, I did watch the first couple episodes of Kuga because I got the Blu-ray set in, and you weren't wrong about the Spider-Man. I'm just like, oh, good Lord, guys. I don't want to go too much on a tangent about Kuga, but I'm like, okay, the characters, the acting, and the story are all good, but these effects and the film that they're using for this is kind of taking me out of it a little bit.
It looks like Bible Man. Let's be honest. His costume's even kind of similar to Bible Man.
The effects look a little bit like that at points, and I swear they're using the same film stock that is used for soap operas because it feels a little too hyper real, and the frame rates feels a little too fast. And I'm like, I have to keep reminding myself, you're watching a tokusatsu superhero show and not a tokusatsu stage show. That's what it felt like at points. But anyway.
Okay, I'm glad to know my friend that has a podcast dedicated to even the oldest and presumably least well-developed effects Kamen Rider series is kind of with me on Kuga, so good to know. But yeah, back to the point I was making there with the practical effects, like, what is a little off-putting is while, yeah, the Spider Kaijin is maybe the best Kaijin we have ever seen in this show. Some of the effects, like when there's a lot of Kaijin in like one of the protest scenes, one of the prisons, like that's when a lot of them start to seem more like high-end Halloween store masks, or like
a little bit.
Yeah, like there's definitely some level of cheapness, but I'm kind of okay with it because like sometimes fake things seem more unsettling. Like, gosh, I still find the little goblins in Troll 2 to be terrifying. I don't care if I can tell it's a rubber mask. Those are still horrifying rubber masks. And I also think like there's some moments where it needs a little bit more enhancement, especially with like, while the designs and build of Black Sun and Shadow Moon suits look awesome, there's something within superhero filmmaking that the Batman movies often run into, in that like, yeah, we've designed this awesome Batman suit, but it looks stupid in the daylight. And I kind of feel that way about both of their costumes. When you see them in the daylight, they just look kind of goofy compared to every other kaiju we've seen. Again, cool design, but it just feels like you're seeing a high-end cosplay in the middle of a park.
Yeah, I can kind of see what you're talking about there. I don't know what it is. Maybe the suits are just designed to work in a particular kind of lighting. I mean, to go back to Kuga a little bit, I will tell you, I think these look more impressive. I really don't want to crap too hard on Kuga because I've only watched a couple of episodes, but there are points where I feel like the Kuga suit looks a little too plasticky at points. I'm like, it's a nice design, but why do your shoulder pads look like they're made of toy plastic and not out of like bulletproof armor or something?
And part of the reason I give it a pass, though, or like I'm not going to harp on this show's effects or the suits looking weird, is that in general, CGI and some superhero movies, like, they look too good, not too real, especially Marvel movies, because we know about what's going on behind the scenes with their effects artists. But
boy.
When you see our current blockbusters or like some James Cameron level effects, and then you see like real world, almost unbelievable things, or like just wild events, it's like this looks fake because it doesn't look as polished as it does in my movies, or like our whatever iPhone camera that shot this didn't underpay a team of special effects artists to polish it up every frame.
Right. But I do agree with you. The effects do look pretty good when they're on there. They're a little bit infrequent. Some of the kaijin do look a little plushy. You know, like the bird boy did look a little plushy, which actually made his gruesome death a little bit harder to watch.
Yeah.
The weirdest one for me, I think it has to be the kaijin we had at the end of episode 3, which really threw me off. The first time I saw it, I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I think, what did I write down in my notes? I thought it was actually a classic Kamen Rider Kaiju that got brought back.
Yeah, are you talking about the one Black Sun fights at that end of the third episode?
Yeah. He's actually a whale. Oh, I thought he was
Right.
Cobra Man. I thought he was Cobra Man at first. But then after I looked at it a little more closely, I'm like, oh, he's a whale.
Whale that spits acid for some reason.
Yeah. Well, that's a little odd.
I do want to say, like, I think my favorite effect I've seen in the show so far is in that fight. For the most part, it stays human level until the very end, but like, both Black Sun and Shadow Moon have like these little cricket appendages on the back of their
Right.
suits, and
Legs.
yeah, legs. Mid fight, while Kataro's still in his human form, like he gets roughed up a bit, and those legs sprout out behind him before he does like the whole transformation. And I love the look of that. And I don't know if we've ever seen like a partially transformed Kamen Rider like this, and I think it's an awesome addition.
Yeah, not quite like that. I've seen some stuff like that in some Spider-Man media. He's had costumes that were like, what was it? The Iron Spider suit? I think had stuff like that.
Yeah, the Iron Spider forms in the comic and movies, and heck, he's even had his own extra appendages here and there.
Yes, he has. Yes, he has. Now, I know one of your notes in here is hopes and predictions for the series going forward. I am really curious to see what they're going to do with Aoi. She's been hanging out a lot with Kotaro, and she wants to continue her activism for the Kaijin, but she also knows that she's making herself a target, so she tells Kotaro, I want you to teach me how to fight. And then, funny enough, he teaches her a little bit of martial arts, but then he's like, it would be easier if you just got a gun. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. Which, to be honest, I know a little bit about Japan and its gun laws, and they're pretty strict. So I don't know if a 14-year-old girl's going to be able to get a handgun or anything. Not to mention, I don't think a handgun's going to stop a lot of the Kaijin that come after her.
That I think is also rooted in some of her inspirations. Like, I feel so bad for not knowing the activist's name, but I remember Jon Stewart had a young woman activist from the Middle East on his show, and like she talked about that strong shift from like wanting to throw her shoe at the men of ISIS or whatever other military force was oppressing her, and then coming around on the like, wait, no, violence isn't the answer to this problem, or like that doesn't help anything. And I think they're pulling with that a little bit here. Like, Yaoi's doing self-defense, but she's not wanting to learn how to strike to kill or strike to harm.
Yeah, I was trying to do a quick Google search, see if I could find that, but I'm not finding anything that I think for sure is what you're talking about. So to avoid putting out incorrect information, I'm not going to say, but so I'm curious to see what they're going to do with her. I really hope she doesn't. This seems like the kind of show that would do it, but I kind of don't want her to get martyred before the end of the show. It would seem like a pretty easy thing to do, which would I mean, it's not bordering on fridging. It would be fridging. So I would rather they not do that. It was already difficult enough in this show to see a young Japanese woman get punched in the face and just blood just gushes out of her nose. That was incredibly hard to watch. And the people who were holding her were intentionally going for her and not for the guy who was with her. The guy was doing okay. So it's almost like they were hurting her to get the guy to talk. The tried and true, okay, you might be willing to endure the pain, but are you going to watch someone you care about suffer? That sort of a thing. That was really hard. That was one of the most difficult things to watch. And it's not even Spider-Man getting his head ripped off. But
yeah. Now, I like what they're doing, focusing on Aoi rather than Kotaro here as the central character. Like, Brandon Easton was just talking about this concept in my last episode. Weirdly, not about Kamen Rider, but instead like Vampire Hunter D and the likes of like when you have these stoic, badass, like solitary characters that are meant to be kind of like just a powerful force of nature. like they remain unchanged for the most part. And heck, we see in the 70s, even when Kotaro's getting into activism, he still has the same attitude. Like, he even says, like, yeah, I'm not that mad about the treatment. Still does everything he can. Like, you can't really have that level of unchanging personality or force be, like, the main emotional focus or, like, the audience point of view character. Like, you need someone that's someone more reliant on him that the audience can put themselves in their shoes. Or, like, you don't see Kamen Riders change, you see Aoi change, or you see the others.
Right. Another good example, I would say, of something like that would be all of the Mad Max sequels.
Yeah.
Have you seen those?
Yeah. I've seen all of them over time.
But all of them are like that. The first movie, because Max does go through a change, Max is the main character. But every movie after that, Road Warrior, Thunderdome, and the Fury Road, they all focus on another character that Max is helping.
Mm-hmm.
Because, Max is that stoic, archetypal kind of force of nature sort of character. You know, he's the man with no name. And so we need, as an audience, we need someone else to latch onto, because it's not going to be Max necessarily.
Yeah, so, like, I hope we get better development with her, because right now, like, a lot of interesting stuff is happening in her life. Like, those people being tortured are her parents, and her caregiver's been murdered, and her best friend technically also murdered for a few minutes. But, like, it feels like if Terminator 2 spent 3 hours following John Connor and his friend, knowing a Terminator is after him, but just like, he's not going to think to check the other arcade. I want to see her get more involved in driving the plot forward, and not just like, the Mr., which is what she calls Kamen Rider, like, Mr's rude or scary, and like just kind of running away from plot development.
Right.
So I really hope we get more from her, and I really do think we will, just with like how that relationship's developing and where the third episode leads off.
Right. And as for our hero and I guess villain with Shadow Moon, although it's a little less clear here, but that's because Gorgum doesn't come across as obviously evil, like when we talked on Henshin then about Kamen Rider Black. I said, like, these are some of the scariest people I've seen in Kamen Rider, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Shadow Moon in the original was, this messiah that they had made for themselves. Kotaro got away. It's not so clear cut here. And I know, like I said, I am expecting him to kind of go the Magneto route here, which I think would be really interesting. And I am hoping that as the show goes on, Kotaro is gonna get over himself a little bit, and he won't just be the broody guy hiding in a bus the whole time. That he will, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, accept the call to adventure here. After spending a lot of decades just not caring, being very apathetic. I'm hoping that's where his journey takes him, but I don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty. I'm sure any of your listeners who have like, I've already binged the whole thing and you are totally wrong. I mean, don't spoil it for us. Okay.
Yeah. And now what you said about Aoi getting fridged earlier just made me think, like, okay, the very first thing we see is 2 children, open surgery, and after the stone's implanted in them, I think that scene ends with, like, seeing one of their arms change. Now, Aoi refuses to remove the King Stone just because, like, it's sentimental from her parents or what have you. And that's literally what's putting her in danger from Gorgum. I could see her getting mortally wounded at some point in the show, and, like, then there's the dilemma of, like, oh, I know that if we put this in her wound, she can become a kaijin like us, and, like, thus heal or what have you. Like, I see that potentially being a dilemma, just because it would justify why they would show such a brutal opening scene of 2 young children undergoing something like that.
Although I think another part of the dilemma is that if that happened, would it undermine her work as an activist? because now she's one of the oppressed class as opposed to a human who's advocating for the oppressed class?
Like, I wouldn't necessarily think so, but like, there also is even more you could explore, and I don't know if they could get to this in 10 episodes, but like,
I don't know.
kind of like passing privilege, basically, since Nubohiko and Kotaro like seem to very easily be able to transform and detransform. They haven't really addressed the belts, but they clearly have some kind of belt on them.
They do.
And also, like, clearly humans that became kaijin more than the others, or like probably at a later state. So like, there's still a lot that can be explored there, and I don't think it necessarily undermines her as a character or her actions. But
right.
in the world of the story, it very easily, like, how does that change for her as an activist?
Yeah, that's more what I'm talking about here. I'm not saying metatextually
gotcha.
does it undermine it. No, not at all. I'm talking about in universe.
And that at the same time, like, that actually builds some really interesting stuff, like further putting her in Kataro's shoes of like, all your activism goes to waste because of something out of your control or something that's really just cruel and unfair of the universe.
Right. And I'm also going to be curious to see how this ends. I don't know if there is any talk of this being more than one season. The fact that it's 10 episodes is already a little unusual. I don't know if I would want a second season, but
Black Sun
Japanese
RX.
Yeah. Black Sun RX. That would be amusing, actually, but but at the same time, Japanese television doesn't typically go, at least from what I understand, doesn't typically go multi-season. I know anime does. I wouldn't be surprised if there's maybe some Japanese dramas that will, go on for multiple seasons, but my understanding is, at least in the tokusatsu realm, is they're one and done. Maybe they get a sequel season, but they're one and done. Usually.
Since Amazon made me do so much digging to find this, I know Amazon writers or Kamen Rider Amazons did get a second season.
Right.
And yeah, with Black RX, with the original series being a thing, I could see that being a factor, or see that like coming into play, as well as like, we don't super know the origins of the Creation King, and there's like the whole cosmic element of the eclipse and things like that. So, like, Black RX, for those who don't know, shifts from Kamen Rider fighting like cultists and cyborg monsters to instead fighting an invading alien force. And like, who knows, maybe with a second season they could explore like the origin of the Creation King, or like maybe this whole kaijin situation is descended from alien visitors that are coming back to deal with however this season ends.
Yeah, just don't let Saban try to turn that into another show. Please, don't. Although, Kamen Rider Black Sun RX crossing over with like Power Rangers 2017 might almost work.
Although, don't give it to Saban, but what about giving it to Shane Cochran to turn into an audio drama?
Oh, well, I would give that man anything, Kamen Rider, at this point. Yeah, Shane does good work. Trust me, I know. He might be writing his own little crossover with the Power Rangers audio drama because he likes a certain snarky bonehead quite a bit.
Yeah, I'll pretend I haven't read the script for exactly what you're talking about. But, I mean, other hopes and predictions, I mean, like, there's the chance Aoi gets fridged to some extent, and that's what motivates Kotaro.
Yeah, there's still a lot to unpack after these first 3 episodes. I'll be curious if they get to all of them in 7 more. I guess my question would be, I mean, obviously we haven't seen the end of the show, but based on what you've seen so far, would you want a second season?
With the 3rd episode making me shift from like, okay, something happened already, to, hey, I want to see more of what just happened. I think there's enough to explore here to expand into a second season. though, with what they're dealing with here, like this particular plot, I would want to be resolved in a single season with maybe some planting and like alluding to what could be explored next time around. But yeah, like, I don't know. I'm just on the topic of Amazon shows. I'm coming off Rings of Power, and I've already been through one show that spent an entire season setting up what might come next season, and the more we can avoid that, the better.
Yeah. All right. So unless you've got anything else, I'm moving ahead in your notes here. Looks like you've got a couple of interesting questions.
Yeah. Well, I first got the questions of the week, and totally forgot to put it in the notes. But we also, this being a Henshin Men crossover, have to do the awards, of course.
Oh, the awards! I hadn't thought about that. Oh, dang. The awards. Oh, man. Wish I had paid more attention to some of the lines then.
So my little question of the week here, Nathan, for you, with this being the second, I think actually third kind of time that Toei's revisited a classic season of Kamen Rider and aged up and darkened it, like with some of the movies they've done based on the original, Kamen Rider Amazons being based off the original Kamen Rider Amazon, and now this. What other season of Kamen Rider that you're familiar with would you like to see get this treatment?
Well, the obvious one, we've talked about it a bit already, would be Black RX. It feels like a natural place to go. I'm not 100% sure how they could get the aliens from Black RX into this, or account for things like Kotaro gets a lightsaber. But, I mean, they're clever enough. They might be able to come up with some form of justification. If they can lean into some cosmic elements, I think they might be able to get it there.
Yeah.
You know, if we find out that like the Creation King is an alien or something, that might give them enough leeway to get there.
Since we've been pretty harsh on it this episode, I would really like to see a reimagining of Kuga, since my understanding is that there's some bad blood between Toei and the actor that played Kuga, so like you're not gonna see him in anniversary specials or anything, and also show needs some work.
Yeah, like, actually, there's been some stuff like that that's happened with some Ultraman actors too.
Yeah, like I think there's a lot of cool ideas to be explored with that season, especially with how much people love it. So I would love to get it in a more palatable form for modern audiences. And like, yeah, I just think the whole idea of like this kind of ancient rider belt, like maybe harkening back to some like ancient civilization rider, is really cool. So yeah, definitely Kuga, or even one of the other Beetle seasons like Kabuto or Agito. I'd think I'd want to see something with that.
Yeah, that could be interesting too. I haven't quite gotten around to those yet, but yeah, I can see how those could work.
Now, similarly though, like the other major Japanese franchise to not yet get this treatment, really, if
entirely,
yeah. So if they did this kind of adaptation for a season of Super Sentai, for those out of the know, the Japanese series that Power Rangers gets its footage from, yeah, what season of Super Sentai would you like to see get this?
Looking at that question, the first one that comes to my mind would be O Ranger. You know about O Ranger?
Yeah, the basis of Power Rangers Zeo that had a lot of darker themes. I know we touched on it in our Power Trip crossover. We did.
I think O Ranger could be interesting because you could really lean into the... I'm going to use the Power Ranger terms because I can't remember all of the Sentai names quite yet, but the Machine Empire, quote unquote, in O Ranger, I think you could really ramp it up and make them really weird and creepy. You know, this kind of encroachment of the machine sort of a thing, where they're just slowly kind of... Basically, you can kind of turn them into the Borg from Star Trek, you know, but make them even scarier, I think. You could lean into that, and the fact that we have a team of Rangers who are using advanced technology to try to resist this oncoming onslaught. This relentless empire of machines that will, that is hell bent on taking the planet Earth at all costs. Really lean into it. It's similar to like Power Rangers RPM, and I wouldn't bring up RPM because it's technically not Sentai, even though they use Sentai footage, but the Sentai it's based on is completely different. Power Rangers RPM is very similar to that, with this relentless robotic enemy who will just not stop until he accomplishes his goal, which is total conquest.
That's a really good choice, especially since like every fan of the original era of Power Rangers really wants to see Zeo adapted at some point. But like you need at least like it would take at least 3 well-received Power Rangers films or reboot seasons to get to that point narratively. So like just
I know Carl has plans to get there. Carl Dutton of the audio drama. He has plans. He has plans to at least get to Zeo.
Yeah, and taking him at least 3 seasons, understandably so, because that's what the show did. But yeah, like I mentioned though, like if we're all waiting on things like Lionsgate films here, it's gonna be a minute before they get to Zeo.
Right. Yeah, it's gonna be a while. But I do think that would be interesting. You could play around also with the motif that they used in O Ranger, that kind of like ancient artifact. It's not quite ancient artifact. It's more like almost more like a 7 Wonders of the World, sort of a thing. Because there's a pyramid and the
Sphinx,
like a Sphinx and things like that. I think you could lean into that a little bit, and that could be interesting as well. I just feel like more that Sentai more than a lot of others that I know of anyway, I think would lend itself to this treatment more than others. But, Die Ranger, not so much. Zhu Ranger, not so much. No. Mega Ranger, probably not. I like Mega Ranger, but I don't think it would work.
Yeah, the one I want to go with here, though, because it also has like that darker connection, even a coincidental connection with the Keita Mamiya. I think the season Jetman would be a really good option, just since like again it's not doing the thing we see too much in America of like bastardizing or like overly making something overly mature that was meant for kids. Like Jetman was always the kind of darker season, similar to O Ranger, and like only didn't get sanitized due to national tragedies. So I think Jetman would make a good one, since it was the one that was
maybe Time Ranger could work.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, Time Force is already pretty dark, and I love Time Force, but Time Ranger might work.
So, moving on to our awards here, though. Nathan, you're going to have to help me out, because I know what the awards are for. I don't remember all their names. So.
That's totally fine. That's totally fine. But first up, we have the Henshin kick. Gotta keep the shtick. For the best stunt or fight scene.
Best stunt or fight scene. While there's definitely better extended fights here, I'm gonna give it to the like partial transformation that Kitaro does at the end of episode 3. I really liked how that fight was done, and like that's the fight I'm thinking of when, especially before they transform. It feels like 2 older men fighting. Like it's not some kind of Kingsman, John Wick, super well choreographed thing. It's kind of awkward and slow and clunky.
It is.
And I like the realism of that. And then you throw the little cricket legs on him, on his back, and now I'm sold.
Yeah, for sure. I think I would probably give mine. I have a feeling there's going to be at least one more award that's going to go to this, but probably the fight with the Spider-Man. Just because that was the moment. That's one of those fights is like, this is what you can expect from this show. Here you go. It's going to be brutal. It's not necessarily going to be fancy. It's not going to be John Wick. It's not going to be Kingsman. It's going to be dirty, and it's going to be brutal.
And
here you go.
That's something that I've been hyped about since before the show even came out. Because I remember when we saw that glimpse of the Spider Kaijin in the early trailers, I was like, oh my gosh, we've never seen a Kaijin move or look like this before. This is awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think you're a very good choice there. Which is why our award to the effects, which is the...
Talking Toku.
Yeah, Takentoku Award. Yeah, that I give to the Spider Kaijin transformation easy.
Yeah, I'm with you there because that is honestly, and I've seen several renditions of the Spider Kaijin because it is Kamen Rider tradition that the first monsters that he fights will be a bat and a spider. Goes all the way back to the original show. They do it at Kuga. They do it in those 90s movies. It's just Kamen Rider tradition. This they did it in black. This is the best version of a Spider Kaijin that I've seen in this franchise.
Mm-hmm.
It's the most different design. It is the most interesting in terms of execution of the special effects, because basically what we have here is we have a guy who does have his face changed to that of a spider, but when he grows the extra appendages, it's not like, like in past incarnations where a lot of times it would just be his human hands become spider legs and then maybe a couple more spider legs pop out of the sides of his body. No, they come out of his back, and he's like, his whole body is essentially the quote unquote head of the spider.
Mm.
And he's walking around and hacking at Kamen Rider at that point.
And it feels even more true to Kamen Rider Black specifically, since, I mean, on your episode, I talk at length about how much I love the Spider Kaijin and spider effects in that. But yeah, like, I thought that one did it better than it's ever been done in Kamen Rider, but that was them absolutely nailing it with the job with no budget. And then here they're coming back around and blowing us away now that they have a budget. So, way to go, guys.
For sure, for sure. And then next up we had Kamen at Ya for the best line.
All right. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but the one most memorable line for me was when young Nobuhiko and Kataro walk into the public meeting of Gorgum, where some speakers rallying up like, "We're angry about this. We gotta fight back. This is bullcrap." And then they just kind of walk in the middle and are stone-faced staring, and guy points at Kataro. He's like, are you angry about Kaijin treatment? And he's like, nah. Man manages to keep going. He's quite I gotta give him credit for being able to roll off something that awkward. But yeah, that I thought was hilarious and really made me wonder about this character.
Yeah. Similarly, thinking back on it, I mean, there's a few things that we've talked about that would be interesting to bring up, like the unscrupulous prime minister's little speech, some of the stuff that's said at the protests by Aoi, and like Aoi's speech at the beginning. You know what? I was thinking about giving it to the little speech that Nobuhiko does when he just shows up on his motorcycle, and then he just stands there, he pauses a really long time, and then goes into his little rousing speech about how Kaijin deserve to have rights. But you know what? Changed my mind. I'm giving it to Aoi's speech in front of the UN in the first episode. Because it's in English, and she speaks English very well. And I think it really does set the stage thematically for what this show is going to be about.
Yeah, and that's really impressive, especially for a young actress, because I've found that can be a problem in other Japanese media, that they'll sprinkle a little bit of English in there, but the actor might not be the best English speaker. So when all of a sudden the subtitles disappear because they decide us Americans don't need them for the one spoken English word line, because I guess they forget hearing impaired people are a thing. Yeah, it always throws me off, and I have to be like, "Oh wait, that was English. I got to process that." No,
yeah.
Girl does an amazing job.
Yeah, she does. What you're talking about makes me think of Shin Godzilla.
Yeah,
there's a character in Shin Godzilla supposed to be Japanese American, and so the idea is that she was actually raised in America. So it's supposed to be that English is her first language and not Japanese. But as native English speakers, every time I hear her talk in English, which is pretty often, I'm like, no, English is not your first language. And I'm trying to be nice, because from what I hear, the actress on set really busted her butt trying to get her English down, to the point where she was crying on set. She was working so hard to get it down. So I'm like, okay.
And
I don't want to be mean. because the character is good. I like this character, but you're not selling me on the English. But it's okay. It's okay.
And that's universal. Like, my dad speaks semi-fluent Russian, or is at least around Russian and Ukrainian speakers, like, all the time. And every time there's a Russian villain in anything on American TV, he's like, that accent's terrible. This person barely knows Russian.
Unfortunately, what most Americans think is a Russian accent is more like generic Eastern European.
Mm-hmm.
Because of, Chekhov from Star Trek and a lot of James Bond movies.
Yeah, are you part of the half of Europe that speaks British, or are you part of the half that speaks Eastern European? Because, like, even Les Mis is British. Listen to those accents.
Yes, this is also true. And then finally, we have what is possibly my favorite award on Henshin Men, WTH, what the Henshin, for the craziest moment. What did you have?
Now, I'm kind of split between two. And since you're the guest, and I'm pretty sure you're going to pick one of these two, I'll have you go first, actually.
I feel like for me, there's one that comes to mind immediately. It's the end of the Spider Kaijin fight, because disemboweling and decapitation, manual decapitation, the Mortal Kombat fatality. I wasn't ready for that. Yeah, that was a little hard to deal with.
I guess the first one I was considering, which really, now that we've seen everything else in these first 3 episodes, isn't as shocking, was the opening of it starting with a kid very much in pain and awake during a surgery.
You know what? I changed my mind. I had a very visceral reaction to both of those from the first episode. Let's go with that one, because
and just how it immediately sets the tone for hey, this is not Kamen Rider for kids.
Yeah. The waking surgery on children. I mean, if it would have been shocking enough if it was adults. No, it's children. Oh boy.
Now, the other one I'm surprised you didn't go with here. I got to go with the Bird Boy curb stomp.
The Bird Boy curb stomp was hard too. Like it's like that, the Spider Kaijin death, and the surgery are all contenders for me. It's just which one that I have the most visceral, shocked reaction to, and the Spider Kaijin was one of them for sure.
Now, with the awards taken care of, I'd like to take a moment to let you plug some of your other material. Regular listeners of the show will already know about your time on the Power Trip with our last crossover episode.
Yes, Power Trip. Power Trip, a journey through the Power Rangers franchise, which I co-host with my friend Michael Hamilton. We have been going through every season of Power Rangers, one season at a time, not a couple episodes at a time. And we, unlike Henshin Men's a sprint. Power Trip is a marathon. So be prepared for minimum 2.5 hours per episode, mostly averaging about 3. And, we dive deep into everything, the characters, the Zords, the aesthetics. Our bread and butter is the thematic discussion. And we also do awards just like these because Michael stole them from Henshin Men. But Henshin Men kind of stole it from another show. We're just a long line of thieves at this point. So yes, the Power Trip. And we've already announced it on the show, since we are coming up to the end of our first season. The next episode we publish will be Ninja Steel. We are currently going through Beast Morphers, which means we only have 2 more Power Rangers series to talk about, and then we're going to do a postmortem episode. We are doing a season 2 to tide us over to the anniversary content for Power Rangers next year, including Cosmic Fury. So we will be looking at a handful of Super Sentai seasons that have been made into Power Rangers, and we'll be taking a look at some Power Ranger comic books next season.
Dang right, you better be talking about those comics.
Oh, we're talking about comics, sir. We made a list.
I've got thoughts, and if you ever need an extra passionate opinion on the show, let me know.
Oh, yeah, well, I'll send you a list of the particular graphic novels that we'll be looking at, and if there's one that you really want to talk about, I'll talk with Michael. So we'll be getting into that. I've mentioned Henshin Men, which is a podcast that celebrates Japanese superheroes and their high flying and high kicking adventures. That's a television podcast, occasionally movies. That's how we connected here, is because I needed to do a filler episode while my co-host needed some time off. So I talked about Hokkaido, and that's how we bonded. It was over Hokkaido because we published episodes on Hokkaido on the same day. So that has been mostly focused on the original Kamen Rider. I unfortunately have to announce that because I have discovered that running 3 podcasts is a little much for me. After I finish the Kamen Rider coverage, I will be putting Henshin Men on hiatus for a little while, but I have big plans for a big comeback for Henshin Men in the future. And then my flagship show is the Monster Island Film Vault, a podcast now I can't even get the shtick right because I'm not doing it in character. Dang it. A podcast seeking entertainment and enlightenment through tokusatsu. It's a movie podcast for the most part, and it talks about mostly kaiju films. We do branch out and talk about other forms of tokusatsu like disaster movies, because yes, tokusatsu just means special filmmaking, so it's special effects driven stuff. So things like disaster movies would qualify for that, or science fiction films or fantasy films that may or may not have monsters in them from Japan. And that also includes some drama segments with an ongoing storyline, if you're into that. So you get some audio drama in there as well. I'm also a cast member on Power Rangers, the audio drama from Scyther Podcast, run by my friend Carl Dutton. I play Rito! So, so the snarky bonehead. So definitely check that out. And if you want to, all of these you can find on the socials and on your favorite podcatchers. If you want to follow the shows on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you can also check out my author website, because I'm also a writer and an author. I have multiple books to my name at this point. You can check out my website, nathanjsmarchand.com. Also check out kaijuramenmagazine.com. I do editing work and I'm a contributing writer there. And the Film Vault website is monsterislandfilmvault.com. I think I got everything.
Thank you once again, Nathan, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure as always.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be on here.
If the listeners at home have any requests for other content you'd like to hear us cover in the future, you can send them our way on social media. You can find us.
We might. I should mention this. Once we finish Black Sun, we'll probably do a follow-up episode.
Oh yeah, part 3 crossover. We're just taking our time on that one.
Yeah, because we didn't think that all 10 episodes were going to drop on the same day.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't plan for this.
We barely squeezed that third one in.
Yeah, sorry. Anyway.
No, you're all good. But yeah, you can find us on the Giant Sized Violence Facebook page, or on Twitter as @UltraMegaCast, or email us at giantsizedviolence@gmail.com. I'd like to thank you for giving our podcast a chance, and give a special shout out to artists Ray Day Parade and Dark Moon Home Video for designing our logo and cover photos. Our intro music and outro music is You're an Ace Kid by Demon Dice from their album Alcatraz. You can check out the new EP, Shut Up, Get Happy, on iTunes and Spotify. Also featured on this episode was the Kamen Rider Black opening theme cover by All Far Away Music. You can check out their originals and other covers on SoundCloud and Spotify. If you want to help out the show, we could really use some reviews on Spotify, or even better yet, Apple Podcasts, to help please the algorithm gods, along with our coverage of recent Toku media for once. But if nothing else, we hope you join us again as we continue to explore the movies and shows that Ultra Mega draws its influence from. But until then, take care and remember to do your part in preventing the spread of the kaiju virus.
Freedom can't be seen by downcast eyes. So raise your gaze until your death beats all and shake your fist to the sky.